Welcome to the Dealing with Goliath podcast. The mission of Dealing with Goliath is to sharpen the psychological edge in negotiation and high-impact conversations for business leaders with skin in the game who want to be more effective under pressure, uncover hidden value, and increase profitability. With expert guests across the business spectrum, we deliver gems of wisdom, delving into their methods, their thinking and approach to business, life, and to problem solving. This is the Grande Cup of Insight, long-form podcast interview where we take the time to delve a little bit deeper into our guests' experiences, stories, and to get those priceless nuggets. I'm your host, Al McBride, and my guest today is Steve Gordon. Steve is the founder of The Unstoppable CEO and the host of the Unstoppable CEO podcast, and has written over 400 articles on marketing for service businesses. He's a best-selling author of 4 books, including Podcast Prospecting, Unstoppable Referrals, Exponential Network Strategy, and The Follow-Up Formula. Through his firm, Steve helps service business entrepreneurs create leveraged marketing systems so they can spend less time on business development and more time on what matters most. So welcome, Steve. Great to have you on the show.
Al, thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Thanks. I very much enjoyed our expert panel chat there a few months back. So very glad to have you on the show after a few postponements. We made it happen. So I appreciate that a lot. So great to have you on.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So tell us a little bit about that you help entrepreneurs create leverage marketing systems. That sounds very exciting. So, I have an idea of what you do, but explain to some of our listeners how you go about doing that.
Well, so if you think about the fundamental challenge for most people who are operating in a service-based business, you're existing as the business owner, the CEO, probably the head accountant. You're probably the one delivering the service. You may be the one cleaning the bathroom.
Right.
And you're certainly the one that's going out and trying to develop new business as well. And so you're pulled in a lot of different directions. And most people who got into that kind of business got into it because they really enjoyed doing whatever it is that the business does. You know, whether it's consulting or accounting or law or whatever, they got in for that aspect of it. But now they find out, okay, well, I've got to go market and sell this thing so that I can do the thing that I got trained to do. And so that's a little bit unique. If you look at product businesses, people generally are specialized within the business. You've got the marketing team, you've got the sales team, you've got the product that's actually delivering the value.
Right.
In a service business, you've got to create some leverage somewhere. And usually the limiting factor in these businesses is that they're not getting enough opportunity in the door. They're not seeing enough new potential clients and having enough of those conversations to really be able to keep consistent growth. And so you see these businesses go through sort of this feast and famine cycle. And the way that you get around that is you build a leveraged system to handle your business development so that it can be working even when you're really busy doing all of these other things that you're supposed to be doing in the firm. So that's really that's what we do and why we do it, is to free up that service business owner and help them realize the business that they really want to have.
Outstanding. Because I know a lot of consultants myself, as a lot of us do, and it is consistently the problem. You know, people are either frustrated that they're working on getting work, or they have the better problem that they're flat out doing the work, but then they're often neglecting the pipeline. So when a series of contracts, you should go through the purple batch where everything's rosy and doing well. And people have, it's natural, you're wanting to deliver a great service to your clients, but you're not filling that pipeline so that, when it all stops, then suddenly you're twiddling your thumbs and getting very nervous for a little while. So how do you help them then? Going a little bit more into the detail, if that's okay. What is your method for filling that pipeline? Because, people do networking, but they often don't do it maybe as optimally as they could do. And that's putting it in a very kind way. So tell us some of your thoughts on that.
Well, we have, I think it's safe to say we haven't tried every marketing method, but we've tried an awful lot. We've
Right.
tried and failed at more than I'd like to admit. Um, and you can watch all of these, gurus who are out there telling you that you need to do this or you need to do that. And those things all do work, but they don't work for everybody. And they tend to work for that person who has dedicated themselves to mastering that particular strategy.
Right.
What we find in working with professionals is that you've got this constraint of time. I mean, everybody has the constraint of time, but I think it's unique in professional services that because you're torn in all these different directions, you've got to have a marketing method that still works and you can still execute even when you're overloaded with client work,
Right.
so that things don't stop. So we've kind of taken the approach that anything we do has to be something that not only will work in theory, but will also work in reality for this, business owner, this professional who already has got a full plate. They're working with clients. So it's got to have a very small time footprint. That's why we've come to really two methods together to help them create leverage and help them do consistent business development. And the first of those is to have that professional write a book. And right.
No, just to jump in there, Steve, I'm sure an awful lot of consultants, and I'm using consultants a wider professional service providers, coaches, consultants, you name it, would think, yeah, I'd love to have a book. And then they think, I don't have 2 years to write a book. So I know you have a very interesting, unique approach to that. I don't know if you want to dive into the full details, but how do you deal with that first objection?
Well, if you're thinking that your book should take 2 years to write, you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
Okay. um, you know, so you mentioned in the intro, I've written 4 books, and technically I'm the author on a 5th book, but I didn't actually even write a word of that. We can talk about how that got done in a few minutes, but there's lots of ways to get books done right now. And when I wrote and finally published book number 1, it took about 30 days, 35 days, start to finish, to write the book. Now, the story that you don't see is the one that happened before that, where I attempted for 2 years to write 2 other books that both ended up in the trash can. So what I discovered when I finally got the first one published was that writing a book is really, to do that successfully, it's more about the process that you follow than about, having the amazing insight or the perfect idea. Yeah, those are helpful. You probably already have those in the work that you're doing. You're an expert at what you do. And if you marry that expertise with a really solid and simple process for actually getting the writing done and getting your thinking clear, that's where most people get stuck with writing a book, is they have the genesis of the idea of, I want to write a book and here's the topic and here are the things I believe about that. But they don't really have clear thinking when it comes down to the detail level. And so that's one of the first things that we do with people, is we get them really clear. And we do that in what we call the book blueprint, where we really, break down every part of that book, to the chapter, and then the key points in the chapter, and then even the key questions to ask about each key point that lead up to the writing, so that when they open up that laptop to, do their writing session for that day, there's no blank page. They've got prompts. It's very, very easy. And that's how you get a book done in record time.
And when you say record time, what is could be usually expected when you use your method?
So we've got 3 ways that we deliver the service. One is that we'll write the book for you.
Right.
And when we do that, it's start to finish published in 60 days.
Wow.
The second is sort of a hybrid approach, where we're going to help you structure the book using our book blueprint method. And then we're going to teach you what we call the rapid writing system. And in that, we just actually went through this process yesterday with a client, mapped out the entire book. And then we give the client a writing plan. We say, okay, well, how much time can you commit on a daily basis? Or maybe it's 3 days a week that you're going to write. So in this case, the client was going to write 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, which is not a big commitment of time.
No.
And so we took that book blueprint and laid out every day, here's what you need to write for your 30 minutes. This is a very, easy, doable, amount of writing in that time. And it's laid out so that in about 19 days, he'll have the book written.
Wow. 19 or 90?
19. 19.
19. That is very impressive. That is very impressive. And so once your clients then have a book, which is pretty impressive. What did you do last month? Well, I wrote a book. It's quite interesting as a starting point right there. What do they then do with it? How does it not just, disappear into the ether or sit on their website? How do they use it?
Well, we look at a book as a great tool to do the selling for you.
Right.
What most people do when they try and sell is they have these great ideas and then they go out and they try and sell their ideas. And they package their ideas in the most inefficient form of packaging you can come up with, and that's a human being. So they literally are the walking, talking package of their ideas. If I want to sell you on writing a book, if I haven't written a book about it, I've got to come and sit with you and explain to you how amazing this whole thing is.
Right.
And I can only do that one person at a time, right?
True.
So now that we've got the book and I've got those ideas packaged and they can go sell for me, now I need to get it in the hands of the potential clients that need it. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that, but for most professionals, the low-hanging fruit is the network that they already have. There are people in that network that already like them and believe in them and need an easy way to share their brilliance with everyone that they know. And so we've got this concept we call the value conversation, where you can go to somebody that you've got a relationship with, and maybe they've got a network of really great potential clients for you.
Right.
And I might come and say, Al, I just wrote this book on how you can, write a book as a consultant in the next 60 days and have it published. And I know that you've got all these consultants that are in your network that would probably really benefit from this. And I want to make you look like a total hero to them. So what I'd like to do is I've got a bunch of copies of the book printed up. I would love to give them as a gift to everybody in your network that you think would appreciate it. We'll make it come to them as a gift from you. What do you say?
Wow. Yeah.
So you've now unlocked all of these relationships. If I come to you the old way of doing referrals, and I just show up and say, hey, Al, do you know anybody that wants to write a book this week? Could you maybe introduce them to me? I'd like to sell them this book service that we have.
Right.
What would you say?
You'd say, well, have a think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you're trying to be helpful, maybe the thing doesn't spring to mind, or you're thinking, well, it feels uneven or imbalanced in the referral area. It seems like a big ask for. Whereas, as you said, I have a book. Can you hand it out to some people you think might be interested? It's a different proposition. It's like I have something that you can give out that could be perceived of value.
Absolutely. It will be perceived of value. I mean, even when somebody gives you a book that you look at it, and I've had this happen to me, people give me books that are on topics that I'm not very interested in, but I'm always grateful that they thought of me.
Right.
I'm never offended by it. I haven't yet been offended. I asked that at one point in a workshop we were doing, and my client said, well, yeah, if somebody, gave me a book that said how to lose, 50 pounds when you're over 50, I might be offended by that. But other than that, there's probably no book that would offend me.
Right. Maybe the subject matter, as you say, might a little bit, but it is one of these things of high perceived value, isn't it? That I read somewhere, a study a few years ago that, because it was what to give in your marketing, and a PDF was, a certain level of cred, and then a video or a series of videos was the next level, and then an actual book was pretty much the highest, I think, wasn't it? And by quite a margin, if I remember correctly. So. And it's very strange because I've been gifted books, and I find it a double-edged sword because I feel guilty if I don't read it, if the next
Hmm.
person calls. But I think an awful lot of people don't really have that guilt. They just think, oh, that's kind of cool. They have it, it feels physical. As you said, there's this,
Hmm.
it's seen as a valuable thing. Even if they don't read it, they might skim through it, and it's kind of marginally interesting. But also, people won't throw it out.
No, they
It
don't.
sits on the shelf, and or sits on the coffee table, and it's right there in view. Is that a big part of the process as well, is it?
Well, yeah, very much so. So I'm looking at what's behind you on the video, and you've got your bookshelf there,
I certainly
right?
do.
And so I see Tim Ferriss owns some real estate on your bookshelf. I see, the Blue Ocean Strategy book back
That's
there.
the
That's
one.
owning some
I
some
need
real
to rejig it,
estate.
actually, because
Yeah.
I have a load of books here and here. So those are the ones
So
I actually reach to. I don't reach behind me as much. I should really
that's
be
all
more
right. It's a good
strategic with what's
background.
behind me.
Yeah. Well, all of those authors literally own real estate in your world.
Mm, it's very true.
Okay.
I
And
should get in
so the
touch and
way
charge them for, for
you
the
should, yeah,
space.
right. So I like that idea of, hey, I've got a patch of shelf space or a corner of the desk in the office of my very best prospects.
Mhm.
We got a client several years ago who came to us after somebody had given him a copy of my first book, given it to him as a gift. Nobody I knew. He's actually in the UK. And somebody that I didn't know bought the book for him as a gift, gave it to him. He never read it. He put it on his nightstand, and he would look at it every night, I guess, and every morning when he woke up. And after a couple of years, he finally booked an appointment with us. And the first thing he said on the call is, "I'm a little bit embarrassed. I have your book. A friend of mine gave it to me. I never read it. I'm not going to read it. I realize I'm never going to read it, but I really need what it says on the cover.
Right.
And you're the guy that can give me that. So how can you help?"
Wow. Talk about credibility builder. Yeah.
Yeah.
But before this interview, I was talking to a mutual friend of ours who's also written a number of books, and he said something similar, that he has different pricing points, but the done for you sort of 50 grand, 80 grand gig, says there's a disproportionate number of those call them up or get in touch by email, and then they get in a call and say, hey, I was handed your book, and some of them read it, some of them haven't, but he said, you're the guy I needed to talk to. And
Yep.
they're ready to go. They're like, this is the thing. Is that typical? Is that now and again? Is that kind of a regular flow? I mean, I'm kind of curious, I have to ask.
Well, it actually is. In fact, I was having a conversation in a mastermind group with Dan Kennedy. I don't know if you know who Dan is,
Mhm.
but very successful and famous marketer. And this was right after I published my first book, and I said, what's the deal? Why do you release so many books? Because he's at the time he was
Hello.
doing like
This is
three new books.
Dan Kennedy, the
Yeah,
no
the
BS
Dan Kennedy.
guides
Yes.
to this, that, and the other. Okay.
Yes.
Right.
And he said, the reason that, and he was at the time bringing back a bunch of books that he had written previously and doing new editions. And he said, the reason I'm doing that is because it allows me to do a book launch. But the other reason is that all of my biggest clients tend to stumble upon one of my books. Maybe they see an ad because he was doing books with Entrepreneur Press, and they would run ads in all of the airline magazines for his books. That was part of his deal,
Right. Wow. Okay.
right? And so they'd be sitting in first class and, oh, I need that book. Or they discovered it at a bookstore. Somebody would hand them a copy. Well, maybe you aren't going to get a book deal that's going to put you in all of those places, but you can get awfully close to that by doing your own book, and then following some of the processes that we've talked about and some of the things we teach our clients, getting yourself in position where people can discover you.
It is the thought that just came to mind is the phrase, he wrote the book on it.
Yeah.
Which is a shorthand for expert, authority, knows their stuff. So
Absolutely.
that's what you're really tapping into. It sounds like a fascinating and brilliant method. I mean, is there a particular criteria? You mentioned service-based businesses. Is there anything else you look for? And equally, is there any red flags that you might say, I'm not, you have to go and change something in your thinking and then come back to us in a little while?
Yeah, very much so. So when when I get an intake form from a potential client
Hmm.
and they're talking about how they want to sell 50,000 copies of their book, I know that they aren't the right fit for our methodology. So there are two types of books in the world of business. Okay. There are you're going to become the next New York Times bestseller kind of book.
Hmm.
And those are great. Most business owners will never write that kind of book for a couple of reasons. One, they don't have a big enough audience already that would get them to that level because the publishers aren't promoting you anymore.
Hmm.
That you're responsible for your own promotion. They're only going to give you a book deal if they think you've got a big enough audience that can sell the book. So they're not giving you the marketing help that they used to. Um, and then you've got to have the budget to go and market that thing on launch. And typically you're going to spend anywhere from 100,000 to 200,000 to make the bestseller lists in the U.S.
Wowzers.
And that doesn't count writing the book and
Right.
editing it and packaging it and all that kind of thing. There's a place for that, and in certain types of businesses, that makes sense. And sometimes you don't necessarily need all of that marketing behind it if you've got an enormous audience. So if you've got an email list of 250,000 people, getting to bestseller status is probably going to be pretty easy for you. And you might want to go that route. But 99% of business owners who would benefit from a book really want what I call a lead generating book.
Hmm.
And that's usually a short book that is probably not going to sell very many copies, but you're going to make millions of dollars off of giving them away over the course of time.
Right.
And those are the people that we can help. They've got a unique approach to how they deliver their service. They're really expert at what they do, but they need to multiply themselves. And the book effectively multiplies their ability to get their message out.
Okay. And how do you integrate that into a wider networking strategy? Because you have the book, you engage with people that already like you, as you say, and support you. I presume there's more steps in that process, not to get all of the secrets out of you, but
No, let's go through it all. So
okay,
yes,
great.
so we start with that kind of closest network because you already have a
Mm,
relationship with them.
mm,
But before long, you're going to run out of relationships there that will share the book once they've shared it. It may be a little while before they share it again, maybe a year. So you're always out networking, right?
mm-hmm.
I used to do that. I was involved in one of the big networking international organizations. Their advice was to spend about 8 to 10 hours a week networking. I did that. It was a slog. I was doing breakfast meetings and lunch meetings and, coffee dates and all the stuff you're supposed to do, which we
Yeah,
can't do anymore at the moment with the current state of the world.
yeah.
Right. And it was great. It worked to a degree, but I finally just decided I wanted to spend time with my family. And so I started leveraging another tool, which is a podcast,
Mm,
and using that as a networking tool. And the reason that I like it is, again, it gives you a lot of leverage in your business development. So what I found when I was doing the in-person networking and going to the mixers by the Chamber of Commerce or the trade association or whatever, is that the people I really needed to talk to weren't at those events. They
mm-hmm.
sent people to those events, but the
Right,
real decision makers, right?
right.
They got better things to do. So I wasn't getting in front of the right people. And when I started using the podcast to go and reach out to the people I really wanted to talk with, I found it was shockingly easy to get another business owner that I couldn't call on the phone and get to answer the phone and take my call. But if I sent an email and said, I have this podcast and I think you do really interesting work and I'd love to connect with you and interview you about what you do. And then I'm going to share it with everybody that I know in the market. would you be interested in sitting down with me for 30 minutes? I mean, they're tripping over themselves to do this.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I've found that a similar thing, as I said, with my podcast. As you said, people who maybe you don't know if, as you said, they mightn't get on the phone call with you per se, but they're happy to sit for 30 to 60 minutes and talk about what they do. And I think a lot of people, particularly professional services people, I did all that when I was an art dealer in a previous life and as an art consultant at that stage. And I don't think, even to this day, I can't remember one sale from all the networking I did. My sales came from directly approaching different, blocks of potential clients, and that worked out very well. But that said, the networking was fantastic for getting to know potential business partners for a project later on, mentors, and old friends, now old friends at this stage. So it was hugely valuable, but not directly for business. So I can totally can feel that, that a lot of people find that frustrating and very inefficient use of time, which, as you said, has become more and more prevalent in the with all these lockdowns and disruptions, COVID stuff. Do you feel everyone should have a podcast, or do you feel there should be certain boundaries around that? Because I'm reticent to recommend people start a podcast per se. Do you have any thoughts around that?
it depends on your expectations for the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
If your expectations are that you're going to go into this and all of a sudden you're going to have, 50,000 listeners to your podcast, you're probably going to be disappointed.
Right.
And, I always tell our clients that you're not doing it for the listenership. The listenership is a strategic byproduct. It's a bonus. Okay. But you're really doing it for the opportunity to create the relationship, because you're going to create this relationship. And if you do it thoughtfully and strategically, you've invited someone who might be a great referral partner if they've got a network or an audience of people that would be a great fit for your business. And so you can invite them on and you can interview them and share that. And basically what you're doing is, I call it leading the collaboration. You're saying, instead of us just showing up at, for a lunch meeting and walking away saying, we'd both really love to have this fantastic mutually beneficial relationship, and then you both never follow up again, you're showing up and saying, you know what, I really believe in this relationship, and I'm going to lead the way by shining the spotlight on your expertise, and I'm going to share it with everybody that I know. And then at the end of this, we can have a conversation and say, I'd love to reciprocate and share some expertise with your audience. I wrote this book, and you've probably got people in your network that, that need help with whatever you wrote the book about. And we went through the value conversation before, but basically have that conversation with them and say, would you be willing to sit down and let's brainstorm how we could give this book as a gift to everybody that you know? And, I've done that with people who have tens of thousands of potential clients in their audience. Now, we didn't send them all a physical copy of the book. In that case, we gave away an ebook, right? Because economically it wouldn't have worked otherwise. But I've also done it with people, who've had, 24 perfect prospects, in which case I sat down and sent each of those perfect prospects a signed copy of my book, physical, in priority mail.
Wow.
So you can sort of calibrate how you deliver it to the size of the audience, but now you're getting exposed to an awful lot more prospects, and in a really powerful way, because you're being introduced as the guy or the gal that wrote the book.
And we touched on, it's a beautiful plan. You can start to see how the different pieces are slotting together very nicely for a very powerful marketing plan. And you've touched on some of the errors and some of the red flags. Now, even just to take a slightly different perspective on that, what do you feel are some of the myths or the common misunderstandings that a lot of professionals who are very good at the service they deliver, as you say, but they're just not really getting that traction of regular stream of clients coming in? What are some of the common myths there, do you think?
I think the biggest one is that if I just do really great work, people will find me.
Right. It's the field of dreams problem a little bit. If I build it, they'll come. If I build a great body of work, I will get referrals, and they do a little bit. So it's not completely false. It's just a
Right.
dangerous premise. Yeah,
It's not a systematic and reliable way to build
exactly.
your business. Yes, it does work, and often it works just well enough to get you to believe, but never well enough to really set you free.
Right. So it's kind of dangerous that way, is that it works a bit.
Right.
Right. It works a little bit, just enough to tease you. Very true. Very true. Just a thought on this one. It's something I often ask guests is, what do you believe that most don't? And it's really just trying to dig out. I'm always interested in people who are very accomplished about what's their unique point of view. Do you feel you have a unique point of view on a certain aspect of business or a certain aspect of networking? You've touched on a few of them, so I'm just wondering, is there another one or one that joins the whole thing up?
Well, yeah, I think the overarching one is that I believe that if you are selling your expertise, you're selling a service,
Hmm.
that the way that you sell that is fundamentally different and unique in the world of sales. And
Hmm.
it is unique for a number of reasons. Number one, usually we're dealing with a very sophisticated buyer of those services.
Right.
The people who are hiring you have hired others like you often, and they know a few things. And so we're not going to fool them with silly marketing tactics, right? Your clients are typically spending a fair amount of money with you,
Hmm.
and that changes the dynamic and it increases the amount of trust that's required. But most importantly, going back to what we said at the beginning about all the different hats that you're wearing, you know, if you're trying to be the sort of always be closing salesperson on the front end, and I know a lot of professionals aren't that way, and this is I think the real challenge of it. If you follow like all of the sales training and the advice and all that, you're going to end up doing things that will tend to erode trust.
Big time.
And then you've got to go, okay, great. I've eroded trust here in this relationship a little bit, but I certainly got you closed. Here we are, Mr. Client. I'll be right back. I'm going to go in that phone booth over there. I'm going to put on my Superman cape and tights, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to save the day for you because that's what you've hired me to do. And it doesn't work. And you want to. Everybody likes to look at the medical profession. They go, "Oh, the doctors have got this figured out," because they knew that, like, we're going to ask people to do this really ridiculous thing. Like, we're going to come at them with knives and needles and ask them to take their clothes off in front of us, and we're going to do really uncomfortable things to them. They have got to really trust us, which means we can't be doing all of the things over here that cause people not to trust. And if you go way back into like sort of 1800s medicine, here in the US, there are all these stories of these folks, snake oil salesmen. They would go around and they would dress up like doctors because there was no credentials of doctors at the time. And,
Right.
and they would have some cure, right? And they would use all of these crazy selling tactics, and people began not to trust that. And so that as the medical profession evolved, they realized this is a big problem. We have the little prescription pad, and if we write the prescription and tear it off and hand it to somebody, if they don't trust us enough to fill it, we haven't actually helped them.
Right.
And every one of us that's in the advice giving business has that same problem. If we have eroded trust so that when we give them the prescription, they don't fully trust that it's in their interest to fill it, then they're not going to follow through. And they're always going to have in their mind that little bit of question and doubt. That is why selling expertise is different. And if you don't approach it differently, you are going to be frustrated.
It's fascinating because you're sparking all sorts of thoughts. First of all, I didn't realize that it makes perfect sense that it was due to snake oil salesmen and con men that actually made the medical profession, well, more professional by having strict credentials and monitoring themselves and all that sort of stuff. And it also reminds then of how some fascinating research, again, out of the States on malpractice suits. So when do some patients sue or press charges, depending on what you're talking about? When do they take that action rather than just accepting essentially an apology? And it's literally that. It's like, it's basically, it depends on how much trust was built with the doctor in question. And if the person said, oh, the doctor spent time with me and I really felt they understood and blah, blah, blah. No, no, we all make mistakes. I wasn't happy about the mistake. We all make mistakes. Whereas they're far more likely to sue if it's like, oh, I didn't feel I was treated like a human being. You barely gave me any time, blah, blah, blah. As I said, the trust is exactly the difference, was very low. They're going to press charges, anything wrong, or sue the person, probably suing, right? It's probably, imagine it's
Yes.
not criminal, but,
Right.
but it's just a huge difference. And are we paralleling into law and accountancy when they have a fiduciary responsibility? Where which, the definition is that I put your interests above my financial interests, that your well-being and interests are above my financial interests, which is what it's meant to be. You can have another discussion whether that's always the case, but it's that same idea of trying to establish trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's the way all of us should be approaching our client relationships, is that, even if you don't have the legal responsibility of a fiduciary, you ought to be thinking of it that way. I mean, that to me is the long-term success route, is to be thinking of it that way. No matter what business you're in, we're in marketing, it's very hard for us to actually damage someone, but I still want to make sure that whatever we are prescribing as our cure is appropriate for them, for where they are in business, and what stage they're at, and all. There are so many factors, and I think everybody who is in an expertise business knows this, and we all, I think most people tend to want to practice that way. The key is to build your marketing so that it puts that on display. It engenders trust before you're ever in conversation with someone, because by the time you're in a sales conversation, whether you call it the initial consultation or, whatever, the discovery session, we put all these fancy terms around it. It's a sales conversation. They know it and you know it.
Right.
So we want to create so much trust that by that point, they already trust you. They already know that you're the one they want to work with. They already basically understand your solution. And they just want to know, can you apply the solution to me? Does it fit? Is it appropriate? And what are the terms of the deal? Can I pay, can I afford this?
Right. And
if
how
you
long
can get
does
it down
to work?
Right. Yeah. And if you can get your
thing,
sales conversations down to that, let me tell you, you don't have to be real good at selling.
Right. Yeah. Very true. Very true. It helps if you are better. But yeah, once the trust is there, as you say, and as we were talking, that connects it to the earlier conversation about the inherent authority of being the person on the book, the writer of the book on the subject. It changes the dynamic radically.
So let me just, if I may,
do,
just
yeah.
sort of put a bow around all of this. And so the reason that we ended up with the book and the podcast as the two methods was really comes back to what we've talked about with the time constraint problem for most professionals. Okay. And so we talked a little bit about how the book allows you to package up your ideas, and now they're really easy for people to share. You don't have to be there. So you can get 10,000 copies of your book out as easy as you can get 10.
Right.
All right. That becomes really powerful and gives you a lot of leverage. It allows you to plant seeds. So I think of books as planting seeds. I don't know when they're all going to sprout and produce fruit, but the more of them that I get out there, the more prosperous I am going to be today and in the future. All right. And so that's a leveraged way to get your thinking, your ideas out. The podcast now comes in and allows you to do basically all of your other business development. So we talked about the networking component of it, but we're recording all of these conversations like you and I are today.
Right.
And this is going to get repurposed into content. And
right.
So, when we're working with one of our clients on this, they're taking this networking and turning it into a weekly content piece that's sent out to everyone in their database by email. It's posted in multiple formats to LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and wherever else that they have a presence. And so all of a sudden for that business owner that has no time, because hopefully they're busy with clients, that 1 hour investment a week allowed them to connect with either a really great referral partner or maybe a really great potential client, establish and build that relationship in a way where they're adding a lot of value right out of the gate, and then take the byproduct of that, this recording, and have all their other marketing done. So everybody's nurtured. There's nothing to write. There's nothing to do. That 1 hour, and it creates a lot of leverage. And so that's why I just wanted to give that big picture view of why we settled on these two strategies.
It's a beautiful big picture view. I mean, it's difficult to do yourself. There's a lot, once you dive into it, there's a lot of moving parts that you need to systematize. As you said, you do the interview, but usually you have an assistant and it's edited and it's all these little steps. But once that's taken care of and you have the system in place, it is actually just that, isn't it? It's an extremely efficient use of your time. I mean, it's one of the things I love about the podcast. I get to talk to people I'm interested in talking to and then just putting it up. And then people email me back, oh, that was really interesting with such and such, and oh, that was an interesting thought there. I hadn't realized that, and that kind of thing. So it's just, as you said, it builds up that sense of presence in a very easy way, dare I say easy. Now, tell me something, just to link it in with my own stuff, because we were talking about trust, we were talking about, building up systems. For me, negotiation, deal making, whether it's doing through pitching or proposals or through other methods, it does a lot. The more trust that you can build, the better. And I'm just wondering, what advice would you have for people on? You've been a CEO of a number of companies. You've been working with a huge amount of as I said, domain experts in many ways. What are some of your key sort of? You mentioned one about essentially adopting that approach of the fiduciary responsibility for your clients and building that trust. What would be some of the other rules of thumb that guide you when you're making agreements, when you're working with people?
Well, so it's interesting. In my first business, which was an engineering consulting firm, we worked for 20 years with this one particular client. They were our largest client. We probably did $1.5 million, $2 million a year with them.
Nice.
In business. All of it on a handshake.
Right.
Never had a contract. They never questioned an invoice. They paid every invoice within 30 days. We never had an issue. There were a couple of liability related things that came up along the way. Over the course of the 20 years, only one of them was actually one where we were, we made a mistake and we, step up right away and said, hey, you know what, this one's on us. Just tell us, how much we need to write the check for. Let's get this fixed as quickly as we can. It was that kind of relationship. And the thing that I learned from that, was that, and we got paid premium fees. We were getting paid 2 times market value, 2.5 times market value. And the client would tell me, I have your competitors coming in here all the time. They want our work. This was a, kind of a marquee client in our geographic area. And I said, they're all very frustrated because I meet with them and I'm polite, but they're never going to work with us. And he told me something really instructive. And I was probably only 3 years out of college. I had just started with the company. It was before I took over as CEO. Right. And he said, the reason that I work with you guys is because anytime there's any inkling of a problem, even if it's not yours, you lean into the problem. And it's never a question of who's at fault. It's how do we fix it? And he said, I'm not ever really that concerned with who's at fault. I know we'll work that out, but we want to fix it because we want to serve our customers and you help us serve our customers. And that really taught me that whenever we're working with a client, if we can help facilitate how they make money, we're going to have a really long relationship and we don't need a whole lot of legal stuff to make it work because our interests are their interests. And if that's always the case, then there's never any conflict, and it's easy.
Makes a lot of sense. Align if you can ensure your interests are aligned and act on that basis. Yeah, but that's a very interesting phrase. That, as you said, that individual told you that he felt you were working as much for them as for their clients. So they got that. I often talk about, people understanding the KPIs of the other side, i.e. what's important, how does that person sitting opposite you win? How do they measure that winning, that improvement? And as you said, for this individual, it was the idea of what do my customers need and how do I facilitate that? Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point, Steve. Yeah, so just on that note, we all have some struggles and we all have some setbacks. What were some of the bigger, what was some of the most instructive either failures or setbacks that you've had in your career? And how did that instruct you?
So two come to mind.
Right.
One was a small one, but very instructive, and the other one was a pretty big one. The small one, I was probably 6 months or a year out of college. I was managing projects at this engineering firm, and we had a client that was chronically slow at providing feedback and giving us what we needed to make certain submittals in this government approval process. And if you let those things sit too long, they expire. You have to start back over at the beginning. It's sort of like, do not pass go directly to jail. You're going to sit for a little while. You're going to get to experience this again. The fun of bureaucracy. But, I was managing this project. The client failed to get what they needed in a timely manner, but I wasn't on top of it.
Right.
And so we had to start over. The client was very understanding, but it was going to cost, I think, $800 to pay the fee again to have the government agency review it.
Right.
And I went to, the owner of the company, my boss at the time, and I said, this is completely my fault. And I'm not going to make any excuses for it. There aren't any. It happened. It has happened. It's going to cost us $800. And I mean, I was right out of college. I didn't have any money other than what I was kind of living paycheck to paycheck, kind of getting on my feet. I said, if you need me to write you the check for the whole thing, I'll figure it out. I'd love to split it up. If we could do it. And I'm like giving him all of these ways that I'm going to pay it back. And he said, no, I just wanted to know that, you would take responsibility. We'll cover it. Not the end of the world. $800 to me at the time was a big deal. Now, it's not nothing, but it wouldn't be a big deal. Sure. I learned a lot just from that experience in how to handle things. That problems are always smaller and easier to deal with if you deal with them right away.
Interesting point. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's all very well saying that, but when you have that experience, the visceral experience of that stress, but also then, as you say, on reflection, that you made a decision that was difficult, that you confronted, you took ownership of it, and then it's something you can look back and be kind of a little bit proud of it, and sort of say, yeah, that was the right way to do it. Yeah,
it's funny. Even still describing it, I still sort of in the pit of my stomach feel what it was like to walk into his office and have to
as you were
explain
describing it, like, I don't
20
think
years later,
still feel it.
Yeah. But the other one was much bigger. Same company, in the 2008, 2009 economic crash. We were working primarily for land development companies in South Florida. And that business, in about the course of 6 months, just ceased. And so we saw about 80% of our clients either suspend all work and go into hibernation or go out of business themselves.
Wow.
And, there are very few businesses that will survive that. So thankfully we were in a position where, my partners and I, we could kind of wind things down, but we made the difficult decision that business wasn't going to go forward. And, and had to, lay off the staff and, wrap things up. It was the right decision because, we were going to either dump money, all the money we had saved and earned into that business over the course of the next decade, because it took about that long for, for that industry to come back.
Right.
Really just within the last 3 or 4 years as it started to revive. But it was difficult, and I was the one that had to make the decisions. And I found out very quickly who my friends were and who they weren't.
Right.
And people that I thought were very close friends turned out not to be. And there were some people that surprised me that sort of, said, look, this is a terrible thing, but we've got to go through it. And, sometimes in life you have to go through very difficult things. And so, for me personally, it was a challenge, because anytime you cut off your income for any length of time, it creates a challenge.
Certainly does.
But then I was able to start this business and do what I really love to do. This was really the thing that I enjoyed most about running that business, is I was doing the sales and marketing. And now I get to help other people, learn the things that we learned in that business, and then, learn things that we've mastered since then with all of our clients. And so out of that came tremendous confidence that, not only could I build one business, up to really good success, but I can do it again. There's a pattern to this. And I know, I hope I never have to experience that, but if I ever do, that, I'll get right back even quicker, because I've refined even, the methods that I used to start this business. And so, yeah, those are sort of the two disasters that the first one's not so much a disaster, but a real learning experience. Exactly. Second one was probably definitely a disaster, but also a learning experience, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. As difficult as it was, as much as I don't have to experience it again, I learned things that a lot of business owners will never learn because they've never gone through it.
Exactly. Pressure makes diamonds, as they say. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you very much for a great conversation, Steve. So if people want to check out your books, check out your podcast, where's the best place for them to do that?
So our website is unstoppableceo.net, but Al, we've set up a page just for your listeners. And so if they go to unstoppableceo.net/Goliath, they will find a link where they can download a copy of my book, Podcast Prospecting, which talks about everything that we've gone over here, how we use the book and the podcast together as a kind of really high leverage system to do your business development. And so they can get a copy of that for free. There's a place on there where if you want to reach out and have a conversation with me, you can book a time on my calendar. Would love to talk with you. And you can also find all kinds of episodes. We've interviewed now over 200 people on the podcast, including the very famous Al McBride. And so you'll find that there. So go check that out too.
Yeah, and that was a great conversation. So thank you again for that, Steve. I'll link to that below the podcast with all the other links that you mentioned. So excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Cheers.
Yes, thank you. This has been fun.